Well, hello everyone. You having a good summer? Yeah. So nice to see you. It's been a while since we've all been together here. For those of you who don't know, I'm John Henry and I'm the director here. And it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this evening's Sheppy Dog Fund lecture. The Sheppy Dog Fund lecture series was established in 2012 by Dr. Alan Klein to address the topics of art, religion, and history prior to the 19th century. Dr. Klein's here with us tonight, and so let's show our appreciation. I also want to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and I'm happy to say those of you who voted for the millage. For your continued support that makes events like tonight possible. Now, we have Dr. Shelley Perlove with us tonight to give her presentation, but I want to have Tracy Glab, our curator, introduce Shelley. Tracy?
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shelley Perlove, as Dr. Perlove is one of the reasons I stand here before you tonight. As an undergrad at University of Michigan Dearborn, I took an Art History 102 class as my humanities requirement with Dr. Perlove, and I was bitten by the art history bug, and I've never looked back. So thank you, Shelley, for such a wonderful introduction to the subject. And this is the part where I'm supposed to remind you to please take a moment to silence your cell phones or anything else that makes noise. We're pleased to welcome back Dr. Perlove, as she was the very first Sheppy Dog Fund lecturer. And tonight she will present Rembrandt's representation of biblical scenes. And I took an entire course with Shelley on Rembrandt, so this is just a little teaser of what is going to be really great. Just a little bit of a teaser of her vast knowledge on the subject. This lecture is going to focus on the religious significance of Rembrandt's images of Abraham, David, Saul, and Bathsheba. Shelley Perlove, Professor Emerita of the History of Art of the University of Michigan Dearborn, has been teaching as visiting professor at the University of Michigan since her retirement. And Dr. Perlove specializes in Italian and Dutch art of the 17th century, especially the art of Rembrandt. She's the author of 2 award-winning books published by Penn State, Bernini and the Idealization of Death. And I still remember your lecture on Bernini, but it's very memorable. And then Rembrandt's Faith, Church and Temple in the Dutch Golden Age. She's written more than 30 articles, essays, and reviews appearing in major journals, and has curated 5 exhibitions devoted to early modern prints. In 2012, she served as consultant and contributing author to the exhibition Rembrandt and the Face of Jesus, which opened at the Louvre and traveled to Philadelphia and Detroit. And you may have seen the exhibition, I hope you did. And here at the FIA, she also gave a lecture regarding the exhibition. Her current book project investigates the religious works of Rembrandt's pupils. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm Flint welcome for Dr. Shelley Perlove.
There's nothing like better than an introduction from a former student. I get to be introduced by the most famous people in the world, but just thank you so much, Tracy. I'm very, very proud of you, too. So, I think I got a little crazy with this talk because every single time I put it on the screen, I change the topic. It sounds a lot like me. I think I have to turn this on. There. Yeah. I support myself with my own voice. Yeah, so You're going to see various titles coming up. And art historians are very famous for doing this. You go and give a paper somewhere, and they always say, well, this is the altered topic. But it's really the same topic. So I have to go look and see which one I put up here. Rembrandt's biblical scenes, the dramatic lives of Abraham and David. But mostly, I'd like to focus my attention on a subject that I have been most recently interested in. And this is the idea of art and the emotions. And in my opinion, Rembrandt is one of the greatest artists in the depiction of the subtleties of human feeling. And I will be going, the next talk I'm giving, I invite you to come, is in Melbourne, in Australia. And they have had a long conference and big grant there on the emotions, and I'm giving the keynote on Rembrandt's Lucretia. So I'm going to give that kind of focus here to my discussion of Rembrandt's biblical narratives, because he's also a great teller of stories. Early on, Rembrandt was 23 years old. He was working in the city of Leiden, and he was visited by a very famous man named Constantine Huygens, who was the secretary to the Dutch stadtholder. Very important man, second in command. And he went into Rembrandt's studio, and he must have seen him working on this painting. It's called The Repentant Judas Returning the 30 Pieces of Silver. This is in 1629. And he referred to, in his diary, this experience of visiting a Rembrandt, also another artist was present there, and called them the beardless painters, meaning they were just so young. They didn't even have a beard yet. And what he did, in looking at this, and this is one of the earliest history paintings by Rembrandt, that is, which told a story from the Bible. And he focused upon this figure here. This is the moment when Judas is feeling great remorse. He goes back to the priest who had given him the 30 pieces of silver, and he begs them to take it back. But they refuse to take it back because it's blood money. And here at the center is the 30 pieces. And here is the figure that Huygens thought was amazing. So I'm going to tell you what he said about it and showing you in detail. He said here, this figure of Judas, he said, that single gesture of the desperate Judas, of a raging, whining Judas groveling for mercy, his frightful visage, his hair torn out of his head, his torn garments, the hands clenched bloodlessly tight, the body wholly contorted in pathetic despair. I place this figure against all of the tasteful art of old time past. A little bit of superlative here. Because, there's Leonardo da Vinci, that's so bad. Okay. But I think this says a great deal about Rembrandt already at a very young age earning a reputation for depicting the emotions. These incredible extreme states of mind and pain through the depiction of the face, the body, the clothing in his work. And very soon after, we see Rembrandt, still young, as he is learning the etching technique, how to do an etching, a print. Here, creating many, many depictions of himself in the mirror. Very interesting. And I have to remind you that each one of these is 3 inches tall.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, very tiny little things. So you work on a little plate here, actually one plate which he divided up and then cut. But as you can see in looking at these, Rembrandt is acting in the mirror. He's play acting. He's exploring human emotion, you know? And not only through the facial features here, but also through the hair and the costume. Of course, this one is very famous, often appears for exhibitions, the sense of surprise, laughter, anger. But Rembrandt was not alone in this. Rembrandt was a thinker. He was a thinking painter, a thinking artist. And he was very aware of the writings, he was very literate about that, of Karl von Mander, who wrote a book called the Schilderboek, the Painter's Book, which was a manual for artists of the North. How could artists of the North, of Europe, Northern European, compete with that in Italy? And he teaches the artists. He says, the expression of passions is the very soul of art. This is the goal. This is it. You have to do it. And he goes on to say, the eyes are the seat of the passions, the mirrors of the soul, messengers of the heart. So we're going to be looking at facial expression as he did in a lifelong quest. 7 years later, he had already received an important commission from the stadtholder through Constantine Huygens. But like most artists, he was late in delivering the paintings. It was a series on, they call the Passion, meaning the religious passion of Christ, the life of the Christ, and he was very, very late. But this is one of the few examples that we have of Rembrandt writing about his own art. And this is what he wrote in sending these two paintings here, one the Entombment, the other the Ascension of Christ. For in these two paintings, obviously I'm translated, the greatest and most natural, well here the Dutch could go either way, motions or emotions. Very interesting word that can say, they work together, have been expressed and rendered, which also is the main reason why it takes so long to execute. That sounds like that's vintage Rembrandt. You know, he's always dealing with his patrons. But this is a very important idea here. That it is hard, he's saying, to express the emotions, and not only that, in the most natural way. So it must come from observation of nature. At the time that he delivered these two paintings to Huygens, he also sent as a gift, because they were getting some of the letters were getting a little bit nasty because Rembrandt, typical of him, raised the price. And of course Huygens said, wait a minute, I'm waiting 7 years here for these paintings, and you have the nerve to raise the price. So he sent a gift. He said, I'm sending you this painting, and we think it's this one, The Blinding of Samson of 1636. It's enormous. 205 by 272 centimeters. Can you imagine the crate arriving at Huygens' house? And what does it show? It shows the blinding of Samson. Delilah here holds the hand in her hand, the source of power. And she's shown against the opening in the tent. She has the light falling on her, the scissors in her hand. And Samson, this great hero, is falling down, and I know it's going to be pretty hard to look at, but this is all about the passion. Rembrandt depicts the moment in which they cut his eyes out. They blind him. And what's interesting here, too, So you talk about, the moment that's chosen of high emotional intensity, but also, look at the detail. His toes flexing with pain. And okay, here goes the, it's a yuck. But he really doesn't hold anything back, does he? And you see here Samson and the blood and the gouging of his eyes as he's overcome by the Philistines. Today I'd like to focus upon certain biblical narratives in conjunction with this discovery or excursion into the emotions. And I'm going to focus upon Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. But I'll tell you, I could talk about anything about Rembrandt in terms of the emotions, because it's always there. But I picked these. I could have picked other things, excuse me. So, the life of Abraham is something, as a subject, that really intrigued Rembrandt. There's no question about it. It's about family drama. It's about difficulties in human life. And it was one that was also very attractive to the Dutch painters and artists of his time. Here on the screen, you see the moment. This is Abraham entertaining the angels. Some of you know the story that at first he sees 3 men approaching, and he gives them hospitality. But then they begin to talk to him. And when they do, at least in here, in Rembrandt's art, one of them makes a very important pronouncement. Abraham here is humble as he brings the food to the angels. And the 2 other angels look like ordinary men, just as the text would tell us. However, this one here, with this turban, is quite magnificent. He holds up his cup and he speaks. This is a gesture of speech. His mouth is open. And here, behind the doorway, there's a nice Dutch door here. You see the figure of Sarah, who is listening. And what does he say? What does he say? Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is in the tent, that Abraham says. The Lord said, now it swishes to the Lord in the Dutch Bible. I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, ha! After I am worn out, did I tell you she was 90 years old? The son helps the story here. After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And she laughs. And what happens next? And this is where, I think the dramatic moment is pursued so well. The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So I teach a course at the University of Michigan on the Bible and art. This is, I think, this is what makes Rembrandt so great, is that he isolates a moment. And this is the moment, in my opinion. Look at her, this is a detail behind the door. She was laughing, but she's not laughing now, is she? It's only that moment of transformation when she realizes, oh, that is the Lord. I have doubted the Lord. And she holds her hand to herself and look at her sense of age, of course, and she is in the shadows, in the darkness here. But some other figures are also here that are significant. And this is what Rembrandt does. It's one moment of drama, but he also moves us to later moments. And of course, some of you know that Sarah had asked Hagar to have a child for her already, and that child was Ishmael. Ishmael. So at this very moment, this is Rembrandt's invention. He includes the figure of Ishmael, who is shown here with his arrow. He's the great archer in the Bible, and he faces the wilderness, already suggesting his supplanting by Isaac, even before Isaac is even born. Another moment here, just whatever he does, talk about the drama. Well, Abraham has 2 sons, and he loves them both, Ishmael and Isaac. Okay? But there's trouble in the household. Ishmael is athletic and beating up Isaac, who's kind of a bookish one, and Sarah is very upset about this. But the Lord comes to Sarah and says, okay, you have to tell Hagar and Ishmael to leave. And she tells her husband, and he is so distressed. He loves Ishmael. He loves Hagar. How can I do this here? And here it says, but God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. It's a nice way of settling a family argument. Listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants shall be named, and of the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. I mean, the Jewish texts always talk about Ishmael, the rabbinic texts as well. And here, look, what do we see? This is the moment that he's casting her out. Hagar is crying, tears. She holds a handkerchief to her face. And here is Ishmael dressed like a prince. Rembrandt is really looking at this text very carefully. And in the doorway, looking out of the window, it's really a doorway, it's a Dutch door. She's looking out, is the figure of Sarah, and next to her is the young Isaac, who looks like a yeshiva boy. He really does. So this is part of Rembrandt's fascination with the Jews living around him. He's wearing, the Russian hat, and this is typical of Rembrandt, to refer to the Jews around him and to bring them into his biblical scene. But look at the figure of Abraham. He has one foot here on the step, the threshold of his home, and the other outside. And with his hand, he says, go. He gives her water, as in the text, and bread. But look at him. He's crying too, because he must do this thing. He's torn. He's torn. So the center of the composition, how he represents this moment of being emotionally torn, is so important here, because he's in the middle. He's almost like a pyramid, and he is literally pulled apart. And this wonderful foreshortening of the gesture makes it so clear, what this is doing to him. There she is. Now, I wrote a large book with Larry Silver on Rembrandt's religious works, And everybody likes to see, say that Sarah's gloating at this moment. But I decided to just kind of search through the Bible on this whole issue of Sarah laughing. And in other parts of the Bible, and Rembrandt was so literate about the Bible, he knew it backwards and forwards. She said, speaking of the birth of Isaac, "The Lord has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." So this is seen, and Rembrandt was very interested as a Christian in the covenant. The covenant will be fulfilled in Isaac. And that's what is being conveyed here. This is the covenant, and the covenant is in the house. And the house for Rembrandt is also a church. It represents something very sacred and holy. And Christian, very famous, St. Paul in Galatians interprets this very clearly. In the New Testament, he said, "For it's written," oops, what did I do? I'm sorry, did I do something? Where's our guy? Okay, that's why it's next to Hey, I love this. Thank you, it's wonderful. I'm trying not to move my hands around. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman, was born after the flesh. But he of the free woman was by promise, that means covenant. Which things are an allegory? For these are the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which refers to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us. This is New Testament. Boom. So, this is important. This is very important to this idea of separation of the two. I'd like to talk about Abraham and Isaac now, as we move through the story. And you could call it the sacrifice of Isaac, as it is referred to by Christians, or we can refer to it as the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, which is the Jewish formulation. And this is very important, because in the Christian tradition, as we will see, it's about the sacrifice that will be fulfilled in Jesus. For Jews, it is about the faith of Abraham to bind his son, which means that the covenant will be everlasting. Okay? And for Muslims, the sacrifice is not of Isaac. The sacrifice is of Ishmael. Quite a difference. Yeah, very interesting. But I'm talking mostly about Rembrandt at this moment. Takes up a subject here that is comparatively rare. This is the moment when Abraham and Isaac are walking up to Mount Moriah for the sacrifice. That was a long journey in 3 days. It's pretty awful. Can you imagine walking with your son, knowing where you're going and what's going to happen? And Genesis explains that Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, "My father." And here, of course, these old references here to "Here am I, my son," and he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt sacrifice?" And Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. And so they went, both of them together. Doesn't seem like much in the text, but for Rembrandt, it was everything. Rembrandt, throughout his life, was interested in the theme of fathers and son. Over and over again. He had lost, when he was married to Saskia, he had lost 3 children. The only surviving child was Titus, and it was the love, his love of his life, his son. So here in 1645, of course, Titus would have been 3, and this boy is much older. I can't say it's a direct modeling, but I think the sentimentality is what matters here. He imagines himself as Abraham, just as Carol von Mander says, if you want to be a good artist, you have to become what you are painting. You have to become that person. And so here, here's Abraham answering his son. And again, this is a mute pantomime of art, right? We don't usually have the text right next to us. However, of course, many of the Dutch knew the biblical text well. But it's an enactment here of a moment. And at the center of that enactment, the center of the composition, is a gesture of Abraham pointing upward. His other hand is drawn to his heart. He looks at his son. You can even see that, so it's very close to the place for the binding to occur. Look at this stone here. And with the etching technique and the lines, he creates a turmoil which represents not only the smoke coming up here from the cauldron, but the smoke, the conflict that is inside him. But I especially like the figure of Isaac, who's holding here the wood for the sacrifice. And this is what I think is amazing. How do you convey the inner feelings? So you look at Isaac's face at this moment, and Rembrandt was often interested in words and listening to words and responses to words. And here you could see that a shadow is over his face. And that shadow is the realization, isn't it? That shadow tells us that he knows. He knows what lies ahead. And this just incredible dialogue of feeling. Abraham here seems very firm in his faith, doesn't he? But Isaac too plays his role of acceptance, and this comes from the Jewish tradition. Josephus, Flavius, who was a Roman Jewish writer, wrote about Isaac and said, in his discussion of this story, he said, Isaac went willingly. It doesn't say in the Bible that, but he emphasized that. This is the binding. This is that faith. Yes, there is another artist who did the same subject, but from a different moment. This is Lucas van Leyden. He's Dutch also. Rembrandt actually collected his prints. He's from the 16th century. But it's very different, isn't it? It doesn't focus so strongly upon the two figures and the drama between them. Rather, we see this vast landscape, right? And here, Abraham kind of looks down while Isaac is carrying the wood. But Lucas van Leyden's is tied to the Christian tradition. Because in Christianity, they link this moment of Isaac carrying the wood to Jesus carrying the cross on the way to the crucifixion. So this creates this very strong connection between the two of them. Rembrandt rather is more interested in the human level, what's going on between the Father and the Son, and what's going on here in terms of the trial of faith that is only beginning. What a subject it is. They call it, of course, the sacrifice of Isaac. So I could teach a whole course on the sacrifice of Isaac. Here on the left is the moment in which Isaac, this is Andrea del Sarto, an Italian artist of the 16th century, where Isaac is on the altar of sacrifice. His knee is on there. Right? He looks out at us, he's bound, and Abraham here hears the voice. As in the text, the angel says, do not touch that boy. Do not touch that boy. And here's the angel kind of bounding in, and the figure of Abraham is triumphant. It's very large, he's dressed in red robes here, he turns around. In the hands of another Italian artist of the 17th century, Caravaggio probes further into that interaction between the three. Abraham now physically pushes his son, Isaac, down on the altar. He holds in his hand, he grips it tightly. It's very physical relationship that's established between the figures. And the angel comes in here and literally stops him with his hand. That's not the biblical text. That's an interpretation of the text here by Caravaggio, who creates this sense of the physical violence of that moment. But in a very Christian way, the angel points to the ram who will be sacrificed instead, which is Jesus. It looks ahead to the future. Okay. Rembrandt, probably one of the most, magnificent prints by him. Subject of Abraham and Isaac is much later, 1655. And Rembrandt really penetrates that moment, doesn't he? He really looks deeply into it. So we have the same three figures, do we not, here? And we do have that kind of physicality here of the angel stopping him, at least, with his voice. But something is added here that is very powerful. Sometimes looking at Rembrandt prints just makes me cry. I mean, how many years I've been doing this? It should be over by now, but I can't help it. Because the angel is embracing him. That's an embrace. That's love. That's love. And this is what he brings here to it. And this figure here does look like his son, Titus, but it's like he's whispering. He's whispering in his ear. And yes, the suddenness of his appearance is conveyed by the way in which he has created the lines on the etching plate, but he takes a burnisher and he rubs them over the lines and opens up the light to come in. And you can see that the wings are turned. They haven't even adjusted. He just has flown in this very moment. And there, the gripping of it. We know that he's going to do it. We know that he's going to do it because he grips that sword. And what about Isaac here? Abraham has covered up his eyes so he doesn't see what's going on here. He's not bound. That's the Jewish version of the story. He gives himself to that moment there. And the place is important too. He's up on a mountain. That's Mount Moriah, which is the later site of the Temple Mount. So this is a very important place for Rembrandt. And what does he show in the background here? The journey. Tiny little figures. That 3-day journey coming in, up the mountain, and the 2 servants that are left behind. Rembrandt had earlier done a sacrifice of Isaac, but it's so different, isn't it? This one here, painting, this is in the Hermitage, again, shows this more as a physical intervention. Abraham drops the knife. This is another invention of Rembrandt here. But I think that what's quite wonderful about this one is, yes, he is bound, but look at the way the light falls on his body. His body is holy. His body is a holy thing. And Abraham looks up in great surprise. The precipitous moment, the Deus ex machina. But it's even deeper than that. Again, Isaac kneels down. He submits, as in Josephus, the Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 13, to what is going on here. But Rembrandt has also taken his engraving tool, and he has created shafts of light that are coming down. God is there. God is there. The invisible God is there, and the angel is his messenger. But when you look at it close up, and this was a revelation to me many years ago when I started my book, when they had digital images and they go bigger, bigger, bigger. Everybody said that Rembrandt, even me, said that Rembrandt couldn't see a thing, that his eyes were closed. But when you look at it up close, yes, his eyes are darkened. Everything in Rembrandt's art is about seeing. Seeing from inside or seeing from the outside. Seeing is understanding. Look at his eyes. They're not focused here. They're in deep sockets. But he is seeing something at that moment. And here's the angel is speaking to him. He hears him. But he looks off over here. And I know people have trouble seeing it. Rembrandt hides the ram. He hides the ram. Caravaggio, the ram was right there. Yeah. What does that mean? The mystery of revelation is in the darkness. And faith is deciphering what is in the dark. He saw it in his head. He saw it in his head. According to Rembrandt, and the Dutch Bible translates Moriah, that mountain, as vision of the Lord, as the Jews do, as in Hebrew, based on the Jewish Bible, Tanakh, which says, and Abraham named that site the vision of the Lord, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision. It's real revelation, isn't it? Physical and spiritual. Oh. I'd like also to talk about David and Bathsheba. Here's another family drama that many of us know. Because David is important, let me just tell you quickly. As in Matthew, David is the ancestor of Jesus. Okay? And his son, with Bathsheba later, Solomon, is the ancestor. These are very important for Christians. So in the incident with Bathsheba, you know, the rabbinic text talks a lot about this. You know, why was David not out there fighting with the other guys? But anyway, it was springtime, the time when kings go forth to war, but David remained in Jerusalem. And rabbis think this is not a good thing. And he looked out from his roof, as we know, and he saw a woman washing herself. And the text is so short. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after her, found out who she was, so he knew she was married. Bad boy. And he sent messengers, and took her. Pretty terse, pretty quick. And she came in unto him, and he lay with her. Seems like a little bit redundant, but they want to get the point across here. For she was purified from her uncleanness. So she's Jewish. She's Jewish. She had bathed. She had bathed. And she returned unto her house, and the woman conceived and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. Ta-da! So in art, the depiction of Bathsheba, you know that her name means well of oath in Hebrew. She is shown bathing, and she's a bathing beauty, is she not, by Rubens, a Flemish artist, kind of showing off her flesh and her sexiness, and she's grooming. And David up here, the telescope wasn't invented yet, but he would have needed it. Good to see her. And here she receives the letter summoning her, and she's all, you know, prettied up, etc. Her legs are showing. She's quite a sexy broad. But Rembrandt does something else with her, with that same subject. And this is Rembrandt's Bathsheba. Whoa. She's nude. Yes, she's being groomed here, right? Her face is off in another world. And most interesting, David's not there. So I struggle with that a lot, you know, in my book. She's holding the letter to summon. Okay, yeah, that's part of the visual tradition. But I looked, and they have done lots of technical examination. David was never there. David was never there. But look what he has done. She's very beautiful, but she's very pensive. Rembrandt is very sympathetic to her at this moment, isn't she? Isn't he? I love this kind of profile that's almost completely a profile, but you see a little bit of her eyelashes there. And there's a sense of heaviness with the light falling over her body. This is 1654. And as I like to do in my class, I said, take away her face. Because her face is gorgeous, it's true. But just her body is so expressive. The weight that she bears at this moment, that sense of stasis. She's frozen there, isn't she? And maybe pregnant. That's what I suggest, but look at her face. Pensive. What am I saying? Rembrandt has sympathy for her. Rembrandt is putting himself in the place of a David. Here, looking at her. She looks like his mistress, Hendrika Stoffels, who in that very same year had been excommunicated from the Calvinist church for, quote, living as a whore with the painter Rembrandt. She was very upset. Rembrandt, she was distraught. Rembrandt went to the Calvinist council and said, listen, she's not guilty. I am. I love her. This woman has given up everything for me. You must let her in. And finally did. So, okay, this is what I suggest. You don't have to plead, because, you know, it's still out there. All right. So what moment is, I suggest that maybe this is not the moment when David is a voyeur and calling for her. I think this is the moment after, because David has her husband killed in battle because, he tries to cover up the crime of adultery. And her husband, when he comes back from war, won't sleep with her, and finally decides, I'm just going to get rid of him. Hello? Double sin here, adultery plus murder. Okay, so I think it's this moment. And when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the mourning was past, David sent and fetched to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And some of you know your Bible, what happened. Right? The child was born, but the child was ill. And David realized after a while why. God was punishing him. And he prayed and prayed and prayed for that child to be saved. Here's Enrica. And here's a wonderful sketch here. He did two of them of Nathan. The prophet Nathan tells him this moral parable about a man who had everything, but he took everything from the poor man. And Bill says, oh, it's terrible. He said, you are that man. So look at Rembrandt, that moment of realization. He's, oh, I have sinned. And Rembrandt shows David at prayer in a way that, what is repentance? David is beloved by Jews and Christians alike as a figure of repentance. And of course, there's the Psalms. David at prayer, this is 1652. Prayer is from the Bible. To the chief musician, that's David. A psalm of David when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy upon me, O Lord, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. You recognize that from the synagogue, representative from the church. Beautiful, beautiful words. But look how he has shown David. In his bedroom, maybe the scene of the crime with Bathsheba. Yeah. And with the curtains open, he kneels. We know it's David because the harp is here. In the Jewish tradition, they said that when David knelt, that the harp played by itself. It's a beautiful idea. It was reverberating with his own prayers. But here, look what he has done. What is repentance? He's taken the lines and drawn them in diagonals across his head. He has lost himself in that moment. Only Rembrandt. And how else was it done before? Over and over, the Psalms were illustrated by a kingly figure dressed in royal robes, kneeling here at an altar with a landscape behind him. Here, David has become humble. He has no royal regalia for him, only his own soul in pain. So, Gary Lawson just sent me an Instagram cartoon telling me your brains are full. I know mine is all full. So, thank you so much. Here's another one. mention very, very quickly, probably less than 1 minute, that this is my 27th tour to Europe, where I take people to Europe to study art, architecture, history, food. And I'm doing one in May, 13th to 21st. And outside, I'll be sitting there if you want to pick up a brochure, or if you want to sign up to be on my list of lectures. Of course, maybe you won't make it to the next lecture in Melbourne. I would love to have you, and I have a little gift also to give you. So thank you very much. Does anybody have questions? I don't know. It's also clear. Yes.
Rembrandt seemed to be so very sympathetic to Sarah. However, are there any portraitures of Hagar?
Yes. And he did very beautiful drawings of Hagar. Now, the one that you saw with her crying as she leaves, but he also did wonderful drawings of Hagar being saved by God, with the angel coming in. Oh, it's gorgeous. So obviously I can't do everything in the lecture, but yes, he emphasizes her face. He did it over and over. And in fact, the Dutch artists in general were very interested in Hagar. In the moment in which she is saved, and the angel comes to tell her that you will, there's 2 times that she goes off into the desert, but the second time when Ishmael's near death, and that's when God says to them, yes, I am with you. I will be with you. So very important, and Rembrandt was clearly very sympathetic to Ishmael and Sarah in also the print that I showed you. Yeah, good. Anything else? Yes?
Well, I've always read in Genesis 24, right after that the ram in the end is pointed out, his horns are stuck in the thicket. It's a figure for Abraham's internal struggle.
Very, I mean, that is excellent. And in the image, I mean, it's so enmeshed in those lines that you feel that. Yeah, I mean, this is what drew me to Rembrandt, I have to tell you, is that he really seems to understand Jewish sources.
In Christianity, I mean, Christ is the Lamb of God, so it would be a lamb, not a ram. And I wonder if you could say something about Rembrandt's sympathy for the Jewish community that was around him.
Yeah, that's a long talk, and but I could, yes, he was. He was fascinated by the Jews, and he was interested as a Christian in Jesus' early life as a Jew. So the presentation, the circumcision, but he also, more than any other artist of his time, he depicted things that related to Jewish rituals. For talit, tzitzit. I mean, I was the first one, to point this out. I gave a talk at Yeshiva on this very same subject. He didn't always get it exactly right, the feeling he didn't do it exactly how many times. But he's the only one that cared about these kind of things. And of course, also very important is his use of a Jewish model for the head of Jesus, which clearly came out of his studio, his school, where he had his students drawing after what must have been a Jew, a Sephardic Jew. And he used these sketches, the oil sketches from that, to create images of Jesus that were so different. So the question is, I mean, I could go on and on about that, but there's no doubt about it. That's what I was looking at Rembrandt for my very first exhibition on Rembrandt, and I said, no, it's just so different. why is it different? So the more I looked into Jewish texts, the rabbinic texts, the more it became clear. Now he had a friend named Manasseh ben Israel, who he did some work for him called the Piedra Gloriosa, for a book. And so he had contact with Jews. He also knew many Christian Hebraists, because there were many Christians in the Dutch Republic who were interested in Judaism. So for example, the albums that they signed, your friendship albums, they would often sign their names in Hebrew. Or they would write little expressions in Hebrew, perfect Hebrew. So they were very interested in the sense of trying to understand Jesus through the Jews, and seeing the Jews that came to Amsterdam, not only the ones who came from Iberia, who looked like everybody else, but also the Ashkenazi Jews who were escaping from the pogroms in Central Europe, who came in and were dressed, that's the dress that he uses. These caftans and the hats of these Jews, and he also depicted them. So I'm trying to make it shorter answer, but the question is, there's no doubt that he was fascinated by the Jews and Judaism. Maybe he even went to Jewish homes for Shabbat because he used challah, he used Jewish bread in the Supper at Emmaus, which shows Jesus breaking bread. Okay, so I think I saw somebody new with a hand up. Okay, yeah, just because I want to give other people a chance. Yeah.
Where was Rembrandt in regard to Roman Catholicism and Protestantism?
Yeah, I don't think that he was against Catholicism. His mother came from a Roman Catholic background. But he was not a particularly religious person in the sense of going to church. But when you look at his art, he is deeply, deeply religious. Calvin was very important in the Dutch Republic. So in my book, I often talk about the writings of Calvin. But sometimes he depicts subjects. I'm giving actually another paper. On Rembrandt and Catholicism, particularly Mariolatry, Mary. So I mean, he moves. This is what he is. He moves through different religions. This is his search here. So it's hard to say exactly. I would say that he's a Protestant, but very open to other religions. Okay, yeah.
Considering the destruction and misappropriation that the Nazis did, and Rembrandt's interest in the Jewish community, etc., do you think that we have accounted for the bulk of his work?
Well, this is another thing. I have taught a course at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, on the Nazis. And I've done extensive work on the Nazis and Rembrandt. The issue of Rembrandt was that they thought, in the 20th century, everybody thought that Rembrandt was Jewish. Yeah. There's a whole thing unto itself. He wasn't, but they thought he was Jewish, okay? But Hitler loved Rembrandt. So what did he do? He said he's a Mischling. He's mixed. He must have been part Christian and part Jew. But the Jewish part was not really that important. But Hitler wanted Rembrandt for his great museum in Linz that he was planning. And he had his agents confiscating and going and gathering together works by Rembrandt. And we could see in the correspondence, in his table talk, which I went through, he kept saying to the agents every time I sat down, get me more Rembrandts. Why don't you give me more Rembrandts? I only have 4 Rembrandts. I want more Rembrandts. So it's a kind of mixed thing. And so that's an excellent, they tried to kind of take Rembrandt out of this Jewish context and, of course, present him as an Aryan. That was also done by some German writers like Julius Langbehn, who called Rembrandt the German teacher. He called it Rembrandt the German teacher, meaning he would teach what it was to be German through his art. So everybody is appropriating Rembrandt, you know? Very interesting. It's a great question. Okay.